Well, have you ever been lied to? Well, I think most of us have, haven't we? We don't really appreciate it. Well, have you ever lied to yourself or deceived yourself? Well, with that under consideration, please take your Bibles and let's turn to a scripture found in Galatians. We want to read chapter 6 of Galatians and verse 3. Notice what that says. It says, "For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he is deceiving himself." Or the previous translation brought out, deceiving his own mind. Well, we're going to read of an account about a man named Belshazzar who ruled as king, second in power only to his father. And he did just that. He deceived his own mind. Well, how did he do that? Well, he exalted himself above his peers. And he even expressed defiance toward God. Well, this account is found in Daniel chapter 5. I invite you to turn there with me, if you would. So if you have that, chapter 5 of Daniel, we won't read all these, just a few. But that first one, it talks about Belshazzar held a great feast. And let's read verse 2 now. It says, "While under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar gave an order to bring in the vessels of gold and silver that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his concubines, and his secondary wives could drink from them." Now, our information brought out that this request was due to no shortage of drinking vessels, but rather constituted a deliberate act of contempt by this pagan king in reproach of the God of the Israelites. So you could say that he really expressed defiance of Jehovah. So in verse 5, we won't read that, but a man's finger appears and it writes on a wall. Verse 12, Daniel is summoned to interpret this writing. So let's now pick it up and read in verse 18. This is what Daniel says to Belshazzar. It says, "As for you, O king, the Most High God granted to Nebuchadnezzar, your father, the kingdom and greatness and honor and majesty." And then verse 20, "But when his heart became haughty and his spirit became hardened, so that he acted presumptuously, he was brought down from the throne of his kingdom, and his dignity was taken away from him." Well, let's move on and pick up the reading in verse 22, because Daniel goes on here. He says, "But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all of this. Instead, you exalted yourself against the Lord of the heavens, and you had them bring you the vessels of his house. Then you and your nobles, your concubines, and your secondary wives drank wine from them, and praised gods of silver and gold, of copper, iron, wood, and stone, gods that see nothing and hear nothing, and know nothing. But you have not glorified the God in whose hand is your breath and all your ways." Well, what was the result? Verse 30 says, "That very night Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed." Well, do you think being killed constitutes as being disastrous? Well, yes. That makes sense, doesn't it? Pretty disastrous to lose your life. Well, do you think Belshazzar was humble? Well, no, he wasn't. Well, what can we learn from this man, Belshazzar, then? Well, it's just as our theme states, learn humility and avoid disaster.